Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, what went right with county snow removal plan? Anything? A Vita Zane Washington Post Metro section. Does Governor Moore's affordable housing agenda strip residential zoning authority away from the county? And elder trafficking. The state knew, and they did nothing. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member and founder of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Welcome to 21 This Week. A lot to cover today. Let's start with something viewers actually lived through this week. This wasn't simply a lot of snow, and 15 years after Snowmageddon snow of 2010, the county couldn't clear the streets and get kids back into school. Mike, the story here is coordination, prioritization, accountability, unplowed neighborhood streets, angry citizens. What is it going to take for the county to be able to clear the streets?
I think this was an interesting snow, I have to say. Growing up in the snow belt in upstate New York, and then being down here where we get these episodic activities. This was a different one. We rarely get snow where it comes down as ice and then stays cold for 10 days and stays under freezing. It would create a very different dynamic. So if you didn't get the snow up, you had chunks of ice to try to deal with, and I think that was a real problem. That being said, I think, as is often the case, there was a lot of this going on too when we couldn't get it figured out. And so I think there were a lot of challenges, but I think Mother Nature presented a different level of snow removal challenge than we typically get.
Well, that's very kind of you, except I know from talking to my neighbors, they were going crazy with their kids not being in school. And so do we have to point a finger at MCPS as well? I don't know. It seems to me that neither MCPS nor the county did a very good job. I don't know who I'm directing that to.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to observe both Mike and I are refugees from upstate New York, and so we're familiar with the more effective snow removal techniques than we see in Montgomery County. But as long as I've been a resident, I've always been kind of surprised by how shocked Montgomery County is when it is a snow day or a snow, as though it's never happened before, and listen, we every couple of years we have these big monster snowstorms, and the response of the county seems to be, well, we didn't know this sort of stuff happened. You're right, there are going to be differences and variations. I think they kind of need to develop a plan. They need to be prepared for a variety of contingencies in terms of the type of snow and the type of removal. And I think you also put your finger on it. There needs to be far better cooperation or coordination, I guess the better word, with MCPS. They have their own challenges. They'll be the first to tell you that there are different weather patterns in a county this large. That said, they need to be prepared to work with the county to get things, expedited removal where appropriate.
Well, it just seems to me, Mike, that the county executive argues, and you both have touched on it, that the county size, density, and different demographics and geography, have come into play. But the school system, needs to have a better explanation as to why there was a lack of coordination.
Well, the county's been the size the county's been for a really long time. And so for the county executive to use that as an excuse, there's nothing new here. And I think I was actually quite disappointed in the county executive's response I just thought that just fell on deaf ears. The reality is that there are challenges. It's a big county. Yes, it's different in Damascus than it is in Bethesda. It always has been, and that's okay. So let's figure that out. And if we need to put more things in Damascus, or candidly, it changes. We had some snows where it goes a little further to the south and it goes to the north, and so we can follow that. I mean, we have forecasters, we have the ability to track those things, and so let's make sure we deploy things appropriately. And so I think at the end of the day, I do get frustrated when we do the finger pointing exercise, because we are going to get snow every year. It is something that's going to happen. We are going to have to respond to it, and it's not crazy to have a plan. And when we get to the end of it, you go, "Oh, gee, it's too big, or it's the school's fault, or it's the county." I think that's a pretty lame approach to it, because we know it's going to happen. Let's have.
Well, that's great, Mike. But you know what we like to do on this show. We like to pull the pin on the political hand grenade. On the political hand grenade as to who's going to take the hit for this. And we all remember Jane Byrne, the first female mayor of Chicago after the legendary Richard Daley. What happened to her? The first big snowstorm, she didn't clear the streets, and her political career went in the crapper. So, Mark, who's going to take the blame for this? We have the county executive who's term limited, but he's running. He's running for county, for county council. Is there going to be fallout for Mark Elrich when he runs for county council?
I'm sure it'll come up in the forums. I was going to observe that Jane Byrne was only the latest. You go even farther back, John Lindsay had problems in the 60s because of the snow in Queens. Listen, this is a function that local governments are expected to be able to perform on. And as you appropriately point out, when they fail to do it, there are really significant political consequences that have a way of sort of crystallizing the perception of the competence of government. So I suspect that Mark Elrich, because he's been in for so long, perceptions have hardened over time, and so it may not quite have as much effect as a new official who's dealing with a snowstorm for the first time. But it matters, and local officials should be better prepared or else suffer the political consequences.
So I'm going to give you the hard question, Mike. The hard question is about the superintendent of MCPS. Mm-hmm. He's brand new in the job. He's very progressive. He's very ambitious. And just before we went on the air today, I learned that he's made a decision about the redistricting of schools and is going to close Wooten High School in favor of sending all those kids to Crown a little further north. But the superintendent has something to blame with this snowstorm. Does he have any credibility left after these two big decisions?
Well, I think he's trying to recast a number of things within MCPS and make some different decisions. I think that the Wooten Crown discussion is going to be interesting, and he doesn't get to make that unilaterally. So he's made his recommendation, and there will be a lot of folks to weigh in. And I've already seen even some of the associations and lobbying organizations have already begun to weigh in, which I thought was interesting with the realtors. The part that I didn't understand was, I get we couldn't actually get people necessarily through sidewalks, but I don't know why we couldn't actually do virtual learning. Presumably we actually have that. We have that capacity. So why did we not do anything for a week and a half? I didn't get that. I didn't understand why there wasn't a system in place that said by the end of day 3, like, okay, here's our plan. And so that part didn't make any sense. I think the superintendent still has credibility, but I think he is going to have a really interesting year with his capital budget request, with his recommendations for redistricting of Crown, and where we're going with snow.
Well, Mike, you got the last word on that, because we got 3 other topics we got to cover today, and the next one is a very interesting topic because it impacts us all directly. The founders that drafted the Constitution placed incredible faith in a free press, enshrined its protections in the First Amendment. But what happens when the watchers stop being watched? Mike, this week, the Washington Post laid off 300 reporters, including the majority of the Metro desk. Auf Wiedersehen, Washington Post Metro, the same reporters that recently exposed the MCPS Beetleman scandal and helped drive a major change in county leadership, you can't govern what you can't measure and you can't see. So how is the public going to know what the heck is going on?
I think it's going to be a real significant challenge. As I heard yesterday, I think there are now 12 reporters left on the metro section to cover a metro area of 8 million people. And arguably, when they reduced it the last time down to the 300 that they had, that was a great reduction, and you saw a significant diminishment in the coverage of the entire area. I think it's going to be a huge issue. I have been somewhat heartened because you've had the banner that has shown up and has started to capture some of these things. You have the Bethesda Beat that is trying to capture this as well. So I think there are some ways that are going to happen. My other real concern is that this allows us to continue to fall into the trend that we're seeing lots of places, which is people only get the news that they want to hear, as opposed to the news that they may need to see to help people make better decisions. And if all people get is the stuff they want to hear, I think it's going to create a very, very divided community.
Well, this goes back decades when we started losing other papers, the Sentinel, the Gazette, and others. What I'm afraid of is that the few outlets are all echoing the same thing, and there's no investigative reporting. And Mark, if there are fewer reporters covering Montgomery County, the incentive for officials to shift from fix problems to manage optics, and we've seen a lot of that already. Whereas it's reporting by press release from the county council. So how are we going to be able to understand, the nitty gritty about what's going on here?
Well, I think Mike mentioned it. Is hopefully new outlets develop, and we've seen them in Maryland. We'll talk about some stories that have been broken by up in Baltimore, where you've got some really effective muckraking journalism going on. But that's really the business. The business model is still being explored. Are people willing to spend in order to support that kind of journalism? And that's frankly a bit of a challenge right now.
So what I don't understand, and I saw this interesting biography about William Randolph Hearst the other day, and the creation of the muckraking journalism style of the early 20th century. And it seems that the Washington Post was trying to pivot, like the New York Times had done. They were doing more on-air stuff. They had, their online features with their journalists, but they still didn't seem to be making any money. So, Mike, where can we go with this? I mean, what are we to look forward to in the landscape going forward? Are we going to be totally reliant on the blogosphere?
I think in the near term, yes. I mean, which is really, I mean, to your point, is that great? It's not great, but at least we have that now. I mean, to your point earlier, you go back another 10 years where we lost the Gazette, you lost the Sentinel, the Post had reduced its coverage of the region. We really didn't have a Bethesda magazine at that point. We really didn't have the banner. And so there wasn't anything in that space at all. At least now you're getting different outlets that people are using, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, blogosphere, that people are starting to get to. Is it great? It's not great, but at least there are things where there are outlets and there is an opportunity to get issues raised in a way that wasn't happening 6, 7, 8 years ago. So,
well, I've got the solution for this.
Okay,
we can go back to the original model for Montgomery Community Media Television and have our own news program like we did when the station was first established in the 1990s. That's what we should go back, have a station devoted to the news of Montgomery County. We got to go on to our next topic. When we come back from the short break, is Governor Moore's housing agenda good for Montgomery County? And senior trafficking. I didn't even know what senior trafficking was until the Baltimore Sun wrote this article. But the state knew about it, and they did nothing. Stay tuned. Oh, welcome back. Governor Moore's signature legislative piece this year, other than voter disenfranchisement, is affordable housing, and he has 3 bills in the General Assembly to attack these issues. Mike, the governor's affordable housing push is sold as increasing supply. Critics say it preempts local zoning authority and invites a Wild West developer mentality. So what's the case?
I don't think that's an or. I think both of those things are true. I think it will seek to increase supply, which is something that we desperately need in the state and in the county. And I think local jurisdictions are resistant because every time we have this conversation locally, everybody runs for the hills because we don't want to actually talk about it, because we don't want to increase housing, because we don't want to deal with folks who don't want to see additional housing in their communities. And so I think what you just described is exactly the situation, and I give him credit for trying to force the issue. And I would encourage our local jurisdictions, while they want to retain their autonomy and authority, to work with the governor to come up with a strategy that allows us to actually increase the supply of housing. Housing is unaffordable, and it's not unaffordable because it's just expensive. It's unaffordable because there isn't any.
Well, but Mike, shrinking lot sizes, it still doesn't change the affordability issue, because there's, if your limited supply is land, and what we need is less regulations, not just more dictates from the government. Mark, the best case against state takeover: what happens when Annapolis preempts county zoning schools, roads, stormwater? This is the camel's nose under the tent when they're trying to tell you what to do with the size of a lot.
Well, the flaw is the focus on density of you putting in multiple dwellings in smaller areas. And this sets up a failure, which is recognizing that families want more bedrooms. And the multiple dwellings that we're describing are typically 2 bedrooms or less. And when you look at where the demand is, it's for more units. So I think we need kind of a more balanced or more holistic view of where the demand is for housing. And I think that includes not just trying to put it near transit areas, but looking at places like the Ag Reserve, where there's lots of land and where there's the potential for more single-family homes.
Well, I think that's a great point, Mark. And Mike, Montgomery County isn't alone in this situation. Prince George's County has gone, back and forth on, townhome bans, and not wanting townhomes in different areas, when that's what's selling. It's great to have single family homes, but people can afford townhomes. So who's going to win out on this battle between the states and the county?
We'll end up doing nothing, as we always do. That's exactly what happens. What happens in Montgomery County is what happened in the state. Everybody will say, oh my gosh, we can't do anything. And as a result, the housing crisis continues. Housing affordability continues to get worse and worse. And the only solution anybody comes up with is we should have rent control, because that's our solution, as opposed to actually figuring out how we're going to address the need for more housing. And that's so nothing will happen.
Yeah, but Mark, if the state does pass all 3 parts of the governor's plan, one of which does deal directly with the state's ability to control lot sizes. And that's a hugely important issue. And, does this just, superimpose another layer of expensive government oversight, or is this actually going to do anything?
The density is a false solution. It's not the right solution for this. And so it's going down a road. Look, you're right across the street from the old White Flint Mall that was demolished years and years ago. You've got 40, 50 acres that is developable, but is not developed. If the land is right there, you can decide how you want to use it. The land is available. The economics really isn't there. It's been a challenge.
Well, I'll just touching on White Flint, because I see it every day. For 20 years I've been in this little submarket, and the problem with White Flint is there's little demand for office in this area, and they keep changing the plans, changing the dynamics of what they want to do there, because the market keeps shifting. And by the time they get one plan approved, the planning process in Montgomery County just is strangulation. Anyway, we got to go. We got to go to our final topic. There have been national news coverage of scandals in Minnesota involving fraudulent daycare and other social programs, yet scant coverage of a crisis right here in our state. New records show Maryland officials knew about senior trafficking, senior trafficking is placement of elderly citizens in unlicensed assisted living homes. And the state knew about it. They discussed it internally, and then they stopped documenting enforcement, while public claiming to the public that the issue was below the radar and was being taken care of. That raises serious issues about government's transparency and accountability. Mark, the documents show awareness, internal strategy, talk, and then radio silence.
And this is, we're kind of going back to the old story that we were talking about by news. This story was broken by Gary Collins, who is a reporter for WBFF. They share that with the Baltimore Sun, who saw a pattern of 911 calls, got in, did a Freedom of Information request, and documented what we've just described. And this is kind of an example where effective muckraking, where doing investigative reporting can really make a difference. To Gary's credit, he was able to come up and document what you just described. And if we don't have that, we won't have this kind of information.
So, Mike, you've experienced being in government. I mean, what happens when you have these internal warnings that conditions are worsening versus the public messaging? Where's the lack of accountability on this?
Bureaucracies are established to be the way that they are for a reason, and unfortunately, and then you have to actually have, in addition to folks who want to report on it from the outside, you also have to have folks that want to look at it from the inside. And so you've got to have your elected officials paying attention to this. You actually have to have folks who are coming in who are new appointees who are going to pay attention to this. And this is an issue, and I will admit it, until you raised it, I have not heard about this issue in particular. And so I do not know a lot about this. But from the broader perspective, it's a trend where it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't fit within, if I'm a legislator or an elected official, this is not necessarily my issue that I want to pay attention to. And so it's easy for them to move on to the next thing. And as a result, it allows for the bureaucratic elements to continue kind of unabated. And until somebody begins to hold people's feet to the fire, it becomes difficult. But this isn't an issue that's on anybody's radar. And so how do you get that to happen? And so to Mark's point, at least having a reporter who has found this and identified this and brought it to people's attention puts it where people don't necessarily want it, but allows it to be addressed.
Well, but does this story have legs, and will it impact on Governor Moore's reelection bid?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't say that as I don't know enough about this issue yet to say how many, where it goes and how it plays. And I think part of it is it's been brought forward. It's now out for the public to view. What happens next?
Yeah. So, Mark, again, we're talking about vulnerable seniors. We're talking about benefit theft. We're talking about abuse. We saw in Minnesota where the governor of Minnesota was very badly damaged by the scandals that are going on there and the theft of government funds. Will this affect Governor Moore?
It'll certainly impact it, and it is part of a narrative. This is one story. There are other stories unrelated but associated with SNAP benefits, where the governor's skill or capacity as a manager really comes in question, and failure to being able to run government programs. And it's a cumulative narrative. That being said, obviously for the governor to be challenged, he needs to have an effective opponent. That's what you need.
That's time for a different story. And
that's a different story. That's a whole other conversation for us for another day.
And again, both of you have this is one reason why I highlighted the story again in concert with the story about the Washington Post. We need good journalism, and we need people who aren't willing just to accept what is on the surface. They're willing to dig into things.
Well, and to be fair, that's where we are as a country right now. I mean, the president and his leadership is trying to say, you can see what you see over here, but I'm going to give you a narrative over here. And there really isn't a capacity for anybody in between to ask those questions and move on to the next issue. And therefore it's glossed over and moved on. So it's a bigger trend. Unfortunately, it's very disconcerting.
Well, it's a big problem for all of us, and we have to be cognizant of it, and have your antenna up for the BS that's being thrown around. When we come back from Party Shots, stay tuned. And welcome back. Now with Party Shots, Mark Uncapher.
So the theme of today's show has been the lack of news coverage as a result of the changes of the Washington Post. So it's appropriate to acknowledge a really effective journalist in Maryland. And that's Chris Papps, who is a colleague of Gary Collins at WBFF in Baltimore. And he has covered the Baltimore schools extremely effectively. And it's resulted in a book, Failure Factory, which I heartily recommend to kind of track where education is in that city.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Well, thank you. I think playing into Mark's theme and the theme of our show, unfortunately, given the lack of journalism that we have available to us, it requires, especially as we go into an election year, elections matter, as we were talking about kind of in the outtake. And so I really encourage folks, especially as we're in February, primaries are in June. That seems like a long ways away, especially when we still have snow on the ground, but it's not. And so I would encourage people to start to identify your issues and begin to find places where candidates are going to be and start to go listen and ask them questions, because you're not going to see it anyplace else.
Thank you, Mike. Now, regular viewers of this show know just how brilliant I am. And during the break, our producer, Jake, told me that MCM is planning on starting its own news show starting next week. They've already had 4 test runs. And so I'm heartily happy to hear that. I'm glad they listened to my opinion, which of course it was invented here first. I want everybody to know that. Anyway, I want to thank our guests for being here. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.